Good evening. Hopefully, we're live now on this very, very warm Monday evening. Hi, everyone. Thanks. Sorry, a bit of technical issues as always. I think the computer's struggling in the heat, like I'm sure some of us are. So, thank you for joining on this very, very warm Monday. Hopefully, you can see and hear me okay. So, we'll just give people a couple of minutes to join in, and then we're going to be looking at some questions and just talking a little bit about rescue dogs. So, hopefully, everybody's found a way of keeping nice and cool, and keeping our furry friends cool as well. So, we'll just get started and have a little chat about settling in some rescue dogs before we wait and see if any questions and answers come up. So, just wanted to say thanks again if you're watching this video. It's an Ask the Expert session run by the APBC, and like I said, we're going to be talking about rescue dogs. So, my name's Tom Candy. I'm a full member of the APBC. I have been for about 2 or 3 years now. I work predominantly in rescue as a senior training and behaviour advisor. So I oversee a number of centres and get to see a lot of dogs in rescue and in homes. So just while we're waiting for some questions to come through, I just wanted to talk about a concept that I discuss quite often in terms of particularly when we're settling in new rescue dogs. So you've just got your new dog from your shelter. It's quite an exciting time. You know, you might have been waiting for a little while, or even if you haven't, you know, it's just a nice thing to happen. Um, and I just want to talk about something that we call the rule of three. So that's based around settling the dog in. So we look at the first 3 days, the first 3 weeks, and then the first 3 months. The first 3 days is where we start to see some of that settling in behaviour. The dog doesn't really know where they are. It might have had quite a stressful time in shelter to the best of the ability of the staff. You know, kennels are noisy, they smell a lot, there's a lot going on. So it can be quite a stressful time for the dogs. So the first 3 days is where we just want to keep things nice and quiet, and think about, yeah, how can we make life as easy as possible for that new dog. So we might want to set them up a nice safe area in the house. Um, Start to build in a bit of a routine, so keeping walks to similar times, although obviously quite difficult at the minute because we might be walking a little bit less than normal with the current temperatures, and keeping things to a minimum in terms of visitors and going to busy places. We want to just keep things nice and quiet and let the dogs settle in gradually. As we move into the first 3 weeks, we can start to make things a bit more realistic, so we can start to add in some new people, whether that's in the house or just meeting people out and about. Start going to slightly busier places so the dogs start to see more other dogs, more people, and just try and keep those nice positive experiences. It's also going to be where the dog starts to recognise that the home is a nice safe place, and we might start to see some teething issues crop in as the dog builds their confidence. So that might be when we think about contacting a trainer or just having a chat with the rescue to see if there's any advice that we can put in place in those early days so we don't see problems develop more. After the first 3 weeks, that's where we move into those first 3 months where the dog's really starting to settle. They've built that relationship with everybody in the home, and we're maybe starting to see the development of issues or more questions cropping up. So again, a really good time to kind of get appropriately qualified people involved so we can address issues before they become sort of bigger problems. And also where we kind of really want to get into that routine of sticking to similar walking times, giving the dog a bit more freedom around the house, and we should be at the point where we've been able to build up the leaving time so we can start to leave the dog for more regular hours as well. So I'll just wait and see if we've got any questions coming in. It might be that everybody's out enjoying the sun, which I can't say I blame them. And I guess while we're just waiting, we obviously could talk a little bit about the heat over the next few days. Obviously, we want to keep walks to the earlier or later parts of the days, just so the pavement and also the air is cooled down a bit. Make sure the dogs have access to fresh, clean water throughout the day and that they're regularly drinking it. Try and avoid them sort of downing large amounts of water. We just want to encourage them to drink throughout the day. We also just want to think about different enrichment ideas if we're not doing as much walks, keeping their brain occupied. So things like frozen Kongs can work really well because that's going to cool them down and keep their brain occupied. Okay, looks like we've got a question come through. So the first question is, please could we help with a 4-year-old pointer who struggles with anxiety when they are out and about? She's escaped her harness twice and just goes scatty and just wants to run in the bushes to hide. So it's quite difficult to get her out of the bushes once she's in there. So the first thing we would always recommend with cases like these is that you speak to your veterinarian and just rule out any medical conditions. Because we just want to make sure that we're working with the best base. And then think about things like making walks a bit more predictable, starting off a bit closer to home so you haven't got too far to go, and even if it's just sitting on your drive or outside the house and just rewarding the dog for being out and about, seeing things go past, and having really high value treats. So we're starting to build a more positive experience with going out on walks and seeing things. That's kind of the bare minimum. And with a case like this where you're really struggling, she's trying to escape, obviously it's quite a big safety risk, so you just want to make sure that maybe she's double clipped, so you've got a harness on and then there's an attachment point that goes from the harness to a collar just to give you a bit more safety and security. And then you want to look at maybe getting somebody on the ground so that they can have a bit more of a look at the problem as a whole and make sure they're giving you the most appropriate advice. But that's what I would kind of just start with, making sure she's nice and safe by having those 2 points of attachment, and then building up to sitting outside, lots of high value food, and just rewarding her for making good choices, watching things go by. And then you can gradually start to expand where you do that. So you might want to drive to the park if she sees things that are quite stressful on the walk. And don't be afraid to have days off as well. So obviously we're talking about it a lot at the minute with the heat, but if you have a particularly stressful day where she is trying to get out of her harness, maybe the next day we just do enrichment and stuff in the garden or a nice short walk, so we're not constantly building those levels of stress hormones, and we give her a chance to recover. Okay. What enrichment would you suggest for dogs in rescue centres and shelter? Really depends. What you want to try and do is give a variety. So we think about sort of the 5 main types of enrichments. You've got like food-based enrichment, which is things like your stuffed Kongs, but even things like scatter feeding their dinner. If you haven't got many Kongs available, just scatter feeding in the kennel or on a placemat. So dogs have to use their nose a bit more. stuff in toilet roll you can do. That's a really easy one. And what we like to do sometimes as well is a good way to get volunteers engaged, or if you got any community groups, is get them to make things like snuffle mats just from old blankets, where you just get the rubber floor mat and then you can use your old blankets, you just tie a knot in it, and then you build that up and it gives you a nice little snuffle mat to base off. But also things like smells. So if you've got members of staff who own small furries or have other animals, you can maybe move some of the bedding, as long as you're taking care with disease, and put some of the bedding in different places. They have the opportunity to kind of smell and get different scents. There's quite a lot of research behind audio enrichment as well, so having audio books or certain types of music playing in the kennels just to give the dogs something different to listen to. So that's going to reduce the general sort of noise of barking that they can hear, and also if it's more spoken words, so things like podcasts, audiobooks, that can really help kind of calm the dogs down while they're in kennels. And then also things like the obvious physical enrichment, but doing things a bit differently. So maybe looking at some basic agility equipment, even if it's some sticks, or getting them to step over, just so that they're having to think a bit more about their feet placement and what they're doing while they're in those environments. There's some really good enrichment ideas, like Kong recipes and stuff like that online, so it's always worth just having a little look what other people are up to. And there's a really good Facebook page called Canine Enrichment, and that's got tons of ideas on as well. So I rescued a 7-month Chihuahua, and he is reactive towards other dogs, so what can I do to help him overcome that? So similar to with the pointer, you want to get that vet check first, just make sure there's nothing kind of going on physically. And then we will always want to think about rewarding the behaviour that we like. So starting at a distance where the dog can cope. So a bit, sorry if you can hear the barking outside, not sure what's going on. Starting at the distance where the dog isn't showing those behaviours that you don't want, so they look relaxed, there's no barking or lunging, and again having those high value treats and just rewarding those behaviours that we like, and then we can gradually reduce that distance. But like with anything, sort of just to get the best information, it's really good to get somebody on site just to give you tips about your timing and what you're doing, and just make sure that we are addressing the right emotion behind that behaviour, so that we're not sort of setting the dog up to fail. So it's always useful to get somebody on the ground, somebody who's appropriately qualified, with a good background, just to help you out. Do you suggest not walking the dogs at all when they are settling in, and for how long? So you can definitely start taking them for a walk, and especially like if they've been in kennels, they might not be the best toilet trained. So we want to start to sort of build up that toilet training and those walk experiences. But it might just be to start with, we just take them around the block, or we take them somewhere nice and quiet. And we build up to the more busy areas, like sort of a local park where they're likely to see lots of other dogs. Those sort of rule of three are just sort of general advice, but it is tricky to kind of give individuals, and it depends on how the dog's doing. Like if you go for a walk and they look happy and relaxed, their tail's nice and loose, their body language is loose, they're sniffing a lot, probably means they've had quite a good walk. And just see what they want to do. Give them a little bit of control over the walk as well. But the first couple of days, definitely we want to keep it nice and quiet, and then you just need to judge it sort of a bit more individual. Bit more of an individual basis. So, hi Tom, how long does it take for the stress hormones to leave the body after a dog is triggered? So again, it's quite a difficult question. It can be a couple of hours, or it could be sort of up to 48 hours, maybe longer, depending on how long the dog has been in that stressful state. So if it's just come out of kennels, it can definitely take a few days to decompress. If it's a dog who's particularly worried about things or sensitive to things, and they have quite a big experience, it can take them a little bit of time to come down after that, in terms of all of the stress hormones leaving their body, and the dog being able to sort of properly relax and go back to baseline, so what we call our baseline, where the dog is kind of in their normal day-to-day mental state. So it really kind of depends on the situation, but definitely sort of a good couple of hours. So if you have a negative experience, or you're worried about something, you've just taken the dog to the vet, or they've had a experience that they are worried by, then you want to maybe just head home a bit earlier, or just do a shorter walk, and then take it a bit easier during that day, and then see how the dog is the next day. But yeah, sometimes it can be a bit longer. Can you go into more detail about building up time alone? Yeah, so often with rescue dogs, we don't necessarily know how they coped alone previously, and even if we've got that information from the previous adopters, they're going to be in a new setting, they've just been left at a shelter potentially, so it's hard to sort of know how the dog is going to cope alone. So we always recommend just building it up gradually. So starting off by setting up a nice safe space, so nowhere that the dog's going to choose stuff that A, you're particularly precious about, or B, is going to cause them any injury if they do start being destructive. So somebody can set them up. If there's a bit of a smaller dog, maybe something like a dog pen. If not, just moving obvious things out of the way when you leave the dog alone. And you just want to build it up for a couple of minutes. And to start with, do that whilst you're in the house. So even things like going upstairs and leaving the dog downstairs, just building up time like that, and then going into the garden. It might be that you leave them with things to do, some toys, maybe a stuffed Kong or something, just to kind of keep them occupied the first few minutes, and then they can gradually get used to self-settling, which is obviously ultimately what we want. The other thing we want to think about is, just making sure that we're kind of keeping an eye on those behaviours, and because we're not there, that can be quite tricky. So I know a lot of people who, when they first get their new rescue dog, you can get some pretty good pet cams off eBay and places like that now for not very much, and it's just quite useful because then you can watch what the dog is doing on real time off your phone whilst you're out of the house. So that's kind of the sort of basis of it, and then you just gradually build that up until you get to the point of a couple of hours or whatever you need for your individual dog. What can I do if a newly rescued dog is performing a freeze behaviour? What's the best solution for this situation? Okay, so normally we see dog freeze sometimes if they've come across something that they're worried about, but it might also be like if they're particularly interested in something. The best thing to do is just move a little bit towards the dog, just to take that tension off the lead. So you've got a nice smile in your lead, so you don't want a nice tense lead, which might add more pressure to the situation. You want it nice and loose, so the dog's free to make some choices. It might be that you slightly angle your body away from whatever the dog is interested in, just to kind of encourage the dog to move that way. And what you really want to do, ideally, is give the dogs a couple of seconds to look. So count to 5. If the dog's still kind of not disengaging, try and call the dog, or make a little sort of sliding movement up the lead to try and get the dog's attention. If you've got our nice yummy treats, we can drop a couple of those to encourage the dog to move away. And then what we want to do is just take the dog out of that situation and gradually add some distance and give them the time to recover. It's hard to say without kind of seeing the behaviour, but that's kind of the basis. You want to give the dog the opportunity to look and then gradually encourage them away and increase that distance to get them out of that freeze, and then have a think about what it was that they might have frozen. Did they see another dog? Or was it a bang? Because that's obviously going to give you information about what you need to work on in the future. My dog chases flies obsessively. Online says about fly snapping, but he's chasing real flies. How can I reduce this? Yeah, so if he's chasing real flies, obviously that can be more tricky. What you might want to do is think about some more appropriate chase games that you could do. So things like flirt bowls can be really useful, or even just doing like ball games, but in a more appropriate way than just sort of lobbing it or using it on a chuckle pole. So things like rolling the ball for the dog to chase. Flirt poles can be really good, just so that we're kind of meeting that chase drive in more appropriate ways. Obviously, trying to get rid of the flies, which can be quite difficult, but if you've got a particular problem in an area, maybe using like an ultrasonic device or something that's going to kind of encourage bugs away. But yeah, definitely trying to encourage more appropriate chase behaviours, and then again rewarding those behaviours that we like. So if there is a fly in the room, try and get the dog to settle next to you, even if that means putting them on the lead for the first 2 times, just dropping treats, trying to encourage some calmer behaviours in the presence of those flies. If they're really bad, what you could do as well is maybe look at some fly noises on YouTube and do the same thing. So you play the fly noise, feed the dog for nice calm behaviours, and then build up to the real thing in the environment. But it's tricky because you obviously can't control the flies necessarily. What are your top 3 questions to ask when rehoming a dog? Yeah, that's really good. So I think a little bit you've got to think about sort of what you want from a dog anyway. But I guess my top 3 would be like, do we know his history? So like, what information can you tell me about his previous home? Have you seen any signs that you're worried about since he's been with you is another good one, because it might not necessarily mean that you're going to say no to that particular dog, but it's always useful to know what the kennel staff have seen. And I think just from an idea of sort of knowing from the rescue, I think a really good question is like, what support can you offer me when I take this dog home? Not all rescues have behaviour staff, but sometimes it's good to know that there's somebody you can call, or there's a group of volunteers, or maybe even like a Facebook page that they can direct you to, just to get some good quality advice. And what you want is ideally for them to be suggesting sort of ABTC practitioners, so trainers or behaviourists on the ABTC register, just so you know that they're kind of up to date with sort of the latest thinking, and they're potentially not using any methods themselves that might make it slightly harder for the dog to settle in when they come to you. So I'll just wait and see if there's any more questions coming through. I think I've answered all of them. I'll just have another check. Hopefully the internet connection has held up, because it's starting and stopping a little bit on my iPad. Just while we wait and see if anything else comes in, just wanted to say a big thank you for joining me this evening, because I know it's quite warm, and sitting next to the computer might not necessarily be something that was your first choice, so I really appreciate you giving the time to listen, and hopefully it's been useful. I've just seen another question come in. So it's any tips on managing neighbourhood noises that a dog reacts to in the home? White noise, radio, etc. to help mute them. Yeah, so this is a big problem if you've got sort of dogs or other things in the neighbourhood that your dog responds to. I'm currently at my parents' house, and their little dog likes to bark at every other dog who barks, and there seems to be quite a few dogs around now where there previously wasn't. So yeah, you've already made some good suggestions, like white noise sound on YouTube, or the radio to kind of block out background noises. And also think about sort of what's a better alternative. So sometimes it's quite useful to teach like a thank you cue. So the dog barks once, you say thank you, you drop a couple of treats down. What you've got to be careful with that is that you don't just create a dog who barks and then waits for the treats. So you want to make sure that you sort of teach it really clearly that it's one bark, you can get some treats, and then that's it. And try and do it only when you hear that other noise. So if it is dog barking, you wait for the dog to bark, your dog barks once, you give your thank you cue, and you feed a couple of treats. But you want to make sure that you're not doing it when there isn't a trigger present, because otherwise, like I said, you potentially risk the dog learning that they can just bark and then get treats every time, which isn't ideal. Other thing you maybe want to think about is teaching the dog something alternative. So when they hear that noise, teach them to go to their bed instead. It depends a little bit on how often those noises are happening, but that's something that can work really well for things like the doorbell. And you can use the same idea for other things. So you teach the dog to go to their bed, so you have their mat out, drop a couple of treats on it, wait for them to move on, mark them and reward them. So you're either using a clicker or you just say yes, drop a treat off, so they walk off, and then you repeat that process, and then you just wait and see if they'll walk onto the bed by themselves, which they normally do. Then you feed them, and then you can introduce the doorbell. So you wait, you doorbell, ask them to go to their bed, feed them on their bed, and repeat that. And that's the same thing with the dog barking. So you wait for the dog to bark, encourage them onto their bed, feed them for being on their bed. Because going to their bed when they hear that noise is going to be a much better alternative than just sort of barking back at it. But if it's happening regularly, you don't necessarily want a dog who's just sat in his bed all the time. But that's some things just to start thinking about, particularly if it's in the evening where you're having the issue. You're much more likely to sort of be able to encourage the dog to settle down and stop reacting to the noise that way. Okay, so we'll just wait and see if there's any other questions coming through before I let you go out and enjoy the last of the sun. It's still a bit warm here for a dog walk, so I think we're going to be waiting a little bit longer to go out with my two, but hopefully it cools down a little bit. Looks like that's all the questions. So yeah, just another big thank you for joining this Ask the Expert session by APBC. Hopefully it's been useful for you. Hope you keep nice and cool the next few days and look after your furry friends. And yeah, just hope you've had a great time. Thanks a lot for joining.